Shit. Doesn't matter. Good morning. I'm just, I'm gonna let you know that I'm not really good. I'm not good with taking compliments by any stretch. That means a ton. I'll try to keep this together. Good morning. Oh, goodbye. It's funny, my headset doesn't fit right anymore. Does anybody know what happened? Why is it not working? I go on one little trip, and oh, John, I did it, huh? Do 4-finger swipe to the other. There you go. As you might be aware, this morning I took a nice little trip to the Baraboo ER. Lovely place, lovely doctor. Not a place, as somebody who owns their own company, you don't really want to go into an ER because you know that there's going to be a healthcare ramification to that. Tay just opened things with health. I'd be remiss if I didn't come up on stage and kind of put a little bit of a close to what happened this morning. Quite honestly, some of the dots connected today. There's a lot of things that happen when we do this that you don't see. I was sitting there watching James kick off things. And by the way, can we just give James a humongous round of applause? He's not lying. This is how this morning went. Yesterday, at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I wasn't feeling good. I thought it was just anxiety. It's happened before in the past. Did the thing. Tried to sleep it off. Whatever. Got up in the morning, came down about 5 o'clock in the morning in the convention center, dusted the bushes down, wrote a keynote speech. Things went away. Continued on with my merry day. Same thing last night, 1 o'clock in the morning. Same thing happened, kind of continued on. Decided, well, I know how to fix this. I'm going to get up, take a shower, come down here at 5:30 in the morning, dust the plants off, and then after I do that, everything will be fine. Except for when I walked from the truck to the production booth, I almost passed out. Now I'm in my mid-40s. Health has become a thing where we need to think about it a little bit more. And it's a little bit harder, and I think back the past 25 years, the things that I've done in this job that we all work, the 72-hour shifts, the sleeping in a cot on the engineering floor, the Red Bulls, the things, the damage that I've done came kind of full circle today. So my heart went into AFib, which isn't something that I knew anything about, and thankfully came out when I sat down in that most awesome chair there, to which I fired open the phone to watch the keynote live, which my wife said, "Are you serious? Please stop." And James is right. There's a lot that goes in, and all the messages that everybody sent and the care that you've given me means a ton, and I sincerely appreciate it. The reality is, we probably need to step a little bit back and put ourselves first. And that's probably true for all of us. So think about that. If I If this little mishap this morning can inspire you, or Tages' story, take care of yourself first, right? Because if I go and I couldn't come back up here, we got a much bigger problem. Because I don't want this to go away, but this also isn't me. It's all of us together. And so thank you to James, because this morning, as I'm contemplating life choices, I send him and Taylor a message, and it goes a little something like this. I didn't have Tages' number, otherwise I would have included him too. We're going to need to fix that. This is literally how I write text messages. Yo, peeps, need a big ass favor. Last night, I think my blood pressure or heart decided to go a little wacky, and I was hoping that it would go away, but I'm just not feeling right, and honestly, a little bit scared. So I'm going to head off to the ER. Can one of you open for Lucia this morning? Or can I get one of you amazing humans to kick off the day? This is the first time I've really been scared about health. That was 6:30 in the morning. So James had all of an hour to take what corresponded as 6 more bullet points and actually turn them into words that made sense. So thank you to James. Thank you to all the keynoters. Thank you to the speakers, our sponsors, to all of you. Because for those who have been here in the past, there is more people at this closing than there has ever been in the past. And I know it's because of me and not James. I just know that deep in my soul. But thank you for everything that has happened this week. Sincerely, thank you. I appreciate it. I would also like to thank the crew. So anybody who's in a purple shirt, any one of my cousins, my kids, would you please stand for just a moment? The production crew here, Fernanda, Brandon, thank you for all of the work, the hard work this week. Thank you for tearing all this down because I'm not helping. I mean, that's a good thing. I'm going to come back to that one. Let's give a big round of applause for all of our sponsors. There's a crew over there. I'm going to have to give them some dollar bills later. We can't do this with the sponsors. You know that. I've said it. You've already talked to them. Remember, I said that this doesn't stop today. This continues to go on. Communities every day. It's not just because you came here. It's every day, and they're just as much part of it as everybody else. Make sure you have the date marked for next year. Take the survey. Right now, Call for Speakers is open for Texas, if that's something you're interested in. Come January 1st, it'll be open for Wisconsin. But the level of excitement next year needs to top this. So this is my challenge for all of you. Because when I get past, a lot of people share with me things, which I think is great. And what I'm about to share with you is just it's the fuel that keeps this kind of thing going. And it doesn't matter if we're 8 or we're 78.
But you're going to be speaking at that conference this year.
Yes! Let's go!
That's what I'm talking about. Somebody earlier was like, hey, I didn't get a picture of the QR code. I was like, take one of the table tents. It's on every one of them. please take the survey. I know James talked about it this morning. We do pour through it. I know it's long. It's long because if you want meaning to it, we have to put time into it. If you realize that I spend 365 days out of the year, yes, honey, I will change that. It means a lot. We take it seriously. So if you could take that, help guide the future of where we go. Before we get to James, what you don't know is he pulled a hammy in the making of this picture. I do want to send, and I'm not going to be able to do this well, but I do want to just sincerely say thank you to my wife and my 2 kids. We do this every day. So there are conversations that happen at dinner. There's stuff that lives in our house. And then there's times like this morning. And so, thank you. With that said, let's welcome James to the stage. Thank you for everything. I'll see you next year.
One more, huh? Yeah? I mentioned earlier that we would have a challenge when we open this, where oftentimes you get on stage, you hear the first one, you say, let's do it again, more energy. The challenge was, and hopefully you maybe considered that or thought about it, was to make this one that we didn't have to redo. So I appreciate that. This is a very special moment. Earlier this morning was oddly a special moment and a nice opportunity for me to be on stage, not in the greatest of circumstances, but it kind of gets me thinking back to not that long ago, just a few years ago. In 2019, I attended my first DAT conference. As a speaker, I was looking to get back into speaking. I had done that professionally, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but I hadn't done it in a few years, and this was one of my first opportunities to get back on a stage and have a platform and an audience to share stuff with. And this was 5 years ago, and at that time, I didn't know many people. I didn't come here with friends, conference friends like I have now. And it was a very different time for me, and that was 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And then I came to that conference last year, first time in a couple years, and my wife was with me, and I remember a moment that many people have when they attend conferences. You watch a keynote, and you think about what it would be like to be on that stage, standing in front of hundreds of people, the bright lights, the applause. You wonder what that would be like, and we talked a little bit earlier about manifesting. And so I sat down with Clark last summer, and I had a conversation with him to say, I'm looking to take the next step in my professional speaking career. I want to be not on that stage, but on a type of stage like this. And that was 1 year ago, and 6 months ago, I got to keynote at that conference, Texas. So I'm very much looking forward to going back to this coming year in 6 months. So after mentioning that to Clark 1 year ago, keynoting on the stage in Austin, and then mentioning to Clark after we had told everybody we weren't going to be able to make it, we were going to have a baby, and Jess, my wife, and I deciding it was worth it for us to be here, that we were going to make it work whatever we needed to do. And I mentioned that to Clark. And a year after talking to Clark and explaining my goals of giving keynotes, I get to stand on this stage today giving another one. And it makes me think a lot about how much can change over time. We'll talk a lot about change in this talk. I think about how things have changed in the past 4 years since being at that conference for the first time. Think about how much has changed in the last year of manifesting myself to be able to have this opportunity. I think about change in the last 6 months of walking into parenthood and figuring out how to balance that with being able to do what I love to do. And as I reflect on that, I start to think about how things have changed as a developer, which is the influence for this talk, and the impact that AI is having on developer experience, how it's revolutionizing developer experience, with the kind of clickbaity title of Are You Ready? And I do this from a perspective of having been in developer advocacy for the majority of my career. So I consider myself to be three things: a developer, a speaker, and a teacher. I've done some combination of these things professionally for over 10 years. And I never thought this would be the case. This was never something that I had in mind, but I realized that I have a passion for teaching. That's why I do this. That's why I create content. That's why I teach boot camp students. And so through all of this content, I'm able to teach and inspire, I talked about this in my last keynote, developers across the world, the power of online content and online community. I've done this a lot. I follow developer journeys. I follow developer products. I've worked at one of the top tech companies in the world. I've worked at a couple of smaller startups. And I could continue to go on with my accolades, which I'd be happy to do more if you want to stick around and have a chat about that. But on this stage, in this moment, in this context, I feel ever so slightly like a fraud. Get rid of the hazard there for the blinking lights. A little bit like a fraud. I'm probably being a little too dramatic about this, but I feel a little bit like a fraud. This is a safe space, right, where I can be honest with you. There's two reasons that I feel a little weird talking about AI from this perspective. One is I don't know anything technical about AI. If you ask me a definition, I couldn't give it to you. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a mathematician. I haven't studied this. I don't really know anything specifically behind the scenes of how it works. It feels a little odd to then give a talk about AI, but I'm just your everyday developer, like probably most of us feel. I don't have any specific technical background in this category, just everyday developer. But the cool thing about this is, as an everyday developer, I get to then share the perspective that AI is having on me and the community that I see without having to be that expert, and that's the benefit of what these features and products and APIs and things that we'll talk about can have on us. Now, the other reason I feel a little fake is I use ChatGPT to generate title options for this talk, and I use ChatGPT to generate a potential abstract. You can go and kind of look up on your phone like what the abstract is that I submitted, because it's different than what's here. It's edited, it's in my voice. But I use AI as inspiration to go and do a thing on the stage. But the big takeaway from this is not only, I can use AI to get to the point of being on this stage, but what AI can't do is be me on this stage. AI can't do what I'm about to do on this stage in this talk. And that will be a central theme that we'll kind of circle back to as we wrap this up. So there are ups and downs of AI, there are benefits, but ultimately it can't replace me as a person. And I think that's really important with the questions that people have on the impact of AI. So two resources that I'll kind of reference a couple of times. I'll give you a few seconds in case you want to scan the QR code. One is an article from Forbes, which has, I've kind of taken some of these out to shorten this talk, but there's a few different numbers that I'll reference. This is a good one to go and look up for your additional research if you're interested. Really big numbers of impact of dollars invested and how many percentage of people think AI is going to take over the world and all these things. And the second one is more of a meta take on the automation of work, which is probably actually more closely aligned with how I will approach this talk. There's a lot of really intricate details in here that are really, really interesting, so I highly encourage you to go and read this after. So let's talk about the history of developer experience. This is probably actually a little more broad than that. So let's start at a pretty macro level. And this is album cover from my father's favorite artist, Bob Dylan. The title, The Times They Are A-Changin'. And if we take this up another level to the most cliche aspect of this that we possibly can, the only constant is change. Heard that before, seems cliche. But I think it's very true, and I think it's very apt. And I think in this economy, the fact is, if you're not open to change and if you're not pursuing change before it happens or when it happens, if you're not open to that, you're open to falling behind. I think this is especially true in developer communities. And I think this is really interesting how your day-to-day life can be drastically different from day to day. Going through death, going through major life events, marriage, buying a house, starting a new job, from yesterday to that day, that next day, your life is different. The life that you live in, the reality that you live in is different. And my new reality is probably something that you've seen, her. You've seen me walk around with as I've been walking around that conference is our baby, 2 months old. And I think that reflecting in life, I think I've handled change well. There's always transitions in life. There's always a next step. And how you embrace that one day to the next reality is key. And that's something that I live by, and it's something that I talk to myself about all the time, is how you handle that. But not everybody shares that optimism. Not everybody is willing to embrace change, to embrace new technologies. And I've worked with these people that have plateaued, people that have given up, people that think this is all that life or job or manager or career has to offer. And they're stuck. But that's not me. And if you haven't guessed or thought about my age, I'll just make it clear. I'm a millennial. And I have a different take on life than a generation before me and a generation before that. And it starts from this pursuit of happiness. Everything that you do should be working towards a next level of happiness. Not happy with your job, go and find a new job. Not happy with manager, go and find a new manager. Not happy with career, go and make a new career for yourself. Now, I also want to admit and acknowledge that that stuff doesn't happen overnight, but I spend my time thinking about what are the steps that I can take to improve happiness in my life. And this gets me to, will AI take developer jobs? How many people have seen a conversation about this on Twitter or maybe are fearful of it themselves? It's a constant question. It's an interesting debate. And if you asked me 2 months ago, before doing some of my research, I would have said an adamant no. But my answer is very different now, and we'll dive into why, and probably not exactly in the way that you expect, but I think AI will take developer jobs in a certain way that we'll talk about. So if you think that AI will take developer jobs, 77% of people are concerned about this too. But if we look at change over the history of time and humankind and how we've evolved, every one of these inventions on this screen changed the way we do things. The printing press allowed us to document in a way that we had never done before. The phone allowed us to communicate in a way that we had never done before. The internet allowed us to be connected in an unprecedented way in history. And if you think that jobs didn't change and jobs didn't get augmented and jobs didn't go away when those inventions happened, you're wrong. So there's a quote from one of these articles talking about how we go through these waves of automation, and when we do, whole classes of jobs go away. But new classes of jobs get created. Well, that's nice. Estimate number from the Forbes article says 400 million jobs could be lost. Could be is obviously, like could is the key word there because we don't know. It's an estimation. And then the next stat says that, oh wait, but 97 million jobs could be created. So yay. But those numbers don't quite add up. Minus negative 400 plus 97 doesn't quite add up. And that led me to this quote, again from this article, that I think is really, really interesting. And it talks about the frictional pain and dislocation in the process of change and evolution. Sometimes jobs go away and sometimes they go to different people, but over time, the total number of jobs stays the same. So if you're fearful that your job will go away, that's valid to a certain extent, but know that jobs will continue to exist, but what we do and how we do it may be different. In addition to that, there's another take on the impact of change. I'd never heard of this before reading the article, and I had to go to the source of all truth, Wikipedia, to find out more about it. Has anyone heard of, and I don't even know how to pronounce it, the Jevons paradox? So most people fear if AI is enabling us, if AI is able to write code for us, why do they need us? Why do they need us as developers? Why do they need people? Well, if we accept it doesn't fully replace us, if we look at it as it can take away part of our job, there's a different perspective. Instead of looking at if we're able to do stuff faster, we don't need as many people, what if we change that and said if we're able to do stuff faster, what if we're able to build more than we've ever imagined before? The things that you're able to build now, you weren't able to build 20 years ago. As a developer, you weren't able to do what you can today 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Thinking back in the past year, you may not have been able to build what you could build today 1 year ago. So this paradox basically said if it becomes much cheaper and more efficient to do something, we can then do more of it. The reason we have this limited capacity to think we're going to fade out is because we haven't opened our minds yet to see the new possibilities and the new horizon. So instead of looking at this as a way to get rid of us, why don't we change this into a mindset of imagine what we can do now? And this is true. I mentioned as developers 10 years ago, we wouldn't be able to do as much as we could now. If we think about hosting an application, what all goes into that? Well, 20 years ago, we had to have our own physical server. We had to manage our own operating system. We had to do patches. We had to handle fault tolerance. And if we had earthquakes or whatever, we had to handle all of those things. But what does hosting an application look like now? Well, two of my favorite products, Netlify and Vercel. 1-click, 2-click configuration to connect to a GitHub repository. They take care of the infrastructure. So I save hours of my time so that I can focus on building more that I hadn't imagined I could build 20 years ago. This resonates even more. Brian Morrison gave his first talk at the conference, which is amazing, by the way. And he talked about basically a demo of building Netlify from scratch. I understood it, but I couldn't and frankly wouldn't do it myself because of what Netlify and Vercel enable for me. I co-host a podcast with Amy Dutton, and we have cover images for each podcast. So it has a few different common things, the episode number, the logo, the title, the images of the people that are there. And we looked at that process of manually creating those, and we use a service called Cloudinary to automatically generate them. I can tell Cloudinary to have this base image. I can tell it to add an overlay of text, this image, this image, this image. And now I've got automated podcast cover images for all new podcasts that we come out with. Meaning we have more time to focus on the thing that we enjoy, which is creating that content. And there's many, many examples of how companies have changed developer experience. I worked for a company called Auth0. My wife will be very proud for me to share that as she works for Auth0 now. So yay, Auth0 was a sponsor here as well. Auth0 enables me to add security and identity and authentication and authorization and all those buzzwords to my application in minutes without me having to do anything or me having to do much. Zeta is a cool database company that allows you to have branching in your database. I also worked at PlanetScale. Shout out to PlanetScale as well for branching. Brian's also here. Zeta has automatic integrations with Netlify and Vercel to kick off like different branches associated with PRs and this kind of stuff, things that I never would have done myself or been able to. I've worked with a few cool products in Supabase and AppWrite that give you a full backend as a service with authentication, database, real-time updates, all these things that you don't have to set up. You just get to focus on what we do best as developers, which is what? To build. And that leads to the struggle of being a developer advocate today. And I think back to my experience at Auth0, and I went to work for an identity company knowing nothing about identity. I didn't really know anything about authentication. I really didn't know anything about authorization. I really didn't know anything about OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 and things that I now couldn't really explain in depth because I haven't thought about it in a while. But that's kind of the point. I was able to be a developer advocate for a company because I can learn the product and share that with other people. And at times, I can have technical conversations with you, but what's the balance? Because you as a consumer don't care. You may care eventually, but the point is that you don't have to. As we build developer products, we focus on how we can enable you to do more with less time, effort, money, those things. And AI is no exception to that. So let's talk a little bit about AI in developer experience. How many people recognize this logo? How many people, keep your hands raised, use it, pay for it? It's now a paid product. Less hands, fair enough. I was extremely skeptical when GitHub Copilot came out, to the point where I created a video saying, here's why I haven't used GitHub Copilot. And my reasoning was, and I think somebody, maybe Morgan mentioned something about like how good these tools are or not for generating code earlier. But the reason was I figured if it generated code for me and I had to backtrack and change that code, the time invested in changing what they gave me probably wasn't worth what they gave me to start. That was my assumption. Morgan, we could debate this later on. I would say, from my perspective, I was 100% wrong with GitHub Copilot specifically. I use GitHub Copilot every day. It's actually very annoying to create content with GitHub Copilot because you can't finish teaching a concept before they give you all the code. But it does things that I never thought were possible. My horizon on what I can build, of what I see, and my capacity now is drastically different. There's one big implication with this, though, is how does this affect learning? And I think this is important because I work with a lot of beginner and intermediate developers, is should you be using GitHub Copilot? Does it take away from your learning journey? And my typical advice is if you're a beginner, my answer is no. You should be writing the code. You should be seeing stuff fail. You should be having the errors, etc. Don't just have it be given to you, because I've made that mistake, and that was me in college, and that's how we've all been with Stack Overflow. It's no different. We've been copying Stack Overflow code for years. The caveat, and this was really interesting, Rizal, who's a developer advocate at GitHub, made a big, long tweet about this that I should have linked, and I don't have it, so I apologize. But she talked about how she actually does encourage people to use GitHub Copilot in the beginning stages of their career because it gets them past certain milestones that they don't necessarily need to know or understand at that time. GitHub Copilot can enable junior developers, beginner developers, learning developers to do more than they ever had before. And the recommendation is be intentional about that and make sure you're not sacrificing the learnings around what you're doing. But beginner developers are able to do more because of tools like GitHub Copilot than they ever have before. There's another thing you've probably heard of, ChatGPT. How many people have used ChatGPT in the last month? It generated this talk for me, so I've used it. I use it often as a source of inspiration, as a source of creativity. Brian and I had this conversation earlier where some people don't quite see the use case of AI, and I think there are like deeper questions of how does it have a bigger impact. But for me, when I feel stale, or I need ideas for content, or I need ideas for titles or abstracts, I use it to spark creativity. So I'm not necessarily, in this specific case, using it for code generation. I'm using it to spark my creativity, to get me past this hurdle where I feel stuck. It's not writing code, but it has an impact on how I then go and write code because it can help me get past certain steps. There was a good example of this. I run a Discord. I talked about my philosophy earlier, Learn, Build, Teach. I run a Discord called Learn, Build, I don't know why I said that again, called Learn, Build, Teach. You can find it at learnbuildteach.com if you're interested. And I was trying to find ways to kind of create engaging questions, discussion questions of the week. I didn't want to do that manually because I'm whatever. I just didn't want to. And so I asked ChatGPT, based on these topics, JavaScript, imposter syndrome, developer tools, can you generate for me 50 questions? It did it. I said, can you convert that to an array? It did it. Copy and paste into my code base, save it into my database, and then create a Discord bot that will post one of those questions every week in my Discord. It wasn't writing code for me, but it was enabling me to bring more value to my community. And this is through like ChatGPT user interface, but the really, really cool and impactful aspect of this is it's available to us developers as builders as an API. Anybody worked with the OpenAI API yet? Probably a handful of people. It's just like, if you're a JavaScript developer, it's just like any other JavaScript package. Install it, configure it, get an environment variable. Don't save it in a public place. Anyway, do that securely. You set it up, and now you have the power of AI to harness in your applications. There's a really amazing example of this. As a content creator, I'm a big fan. Also, the creator of this and the founding team are friends of mine, which is really exciting. But this is a product called VideoTap, and it takes a YouTube video, you give it a link, and it will generate a blog post for you. It's not just generating a transcription, it's generating headers and body paragraph and text and images and code snippets and links. As a content creator, I'm able to create more content than I ever was before because of this. And this is not just true for me, this is true for other creators as well. And we have this fear of, like, if AI is generating content, what separates a content creator? Everybody is a content creator. Well, one, that's part of the point, is everybody should be able to create more content. But the caveat to this is you have to have the human touch to be able to customize it. I'm not going to take an auto-generated post from AI and post that and call this mine. That's not how it works. What I do is I use that as a starting point and a framework that I can go and customize and turn it into my voice and then call it my own. But it didn't take me as long as it would have had I done it from scratch. Oh, that's me on there, by the way. That's what that arrow's for. Little tiny image, it's me. Another cool example of this, one of my favorite frameworks right now, Astro. I'm actually working on a course. If you're interested, it's at astrocourse.dev. But they ingested their docs into, again, I won't do the technical terms justice here, but some sort of fancy search algorithm index thing in a database to now you can search not just by actual keywords that you type and get matched or fuzzy match, but on concepts and ideas. So if you search for something that's related to something that's in their documentation, but you're not matching any words, specifically, it can handle those associations of meaning, and it can help find the right resource for you. Similar example is Zeta, I mentioned them earlier, has now kind of built-in vector search field where you can add this, again, the words, this fancy search potential using AI behind the scenes in a way that we've never had before. With all these tools, I now have the ability to harness the power of AI inside of the applications and things that I build. And to me, this impact feels different. This is no shot at other things, but I never got crypto. I never got Web3. This is not a shot at any of this. This is just me. I never got those. I never felt it. You know how you feel things and you're like, oh, that's a thing that I care about. AI is that for me. It feels different than things in the past. There's been a lot of trends. There's a lot of excitement on Twitter, but this feels different. But as you're probably not surprised, AI is not perfect. AI actually falls short, and I really start from this image. It means a lot to me, and I'm curious if anybody else will kind of resonate with this. Maybe this helps to kind of point directly at this sensor. If we can't create a sink that can reasonably understand when we're trying to wash our hands, why are we fearing AI? Like, we can't even get that right. I had one example, like after I gave the talk, I then went to the bathroom. I gave this talk before. I went to the bathroom, and I went to wash my hands. It didn't come out, so I figured I'll just go and get soap while the water is thinking. I go over to the soap. The water comes out. The soap doesn't read, so I come back to the water, which it has stopped in the meantime while the soap has come out. Like, if we can't figure that out, where are we with this really? And so there's some entertaining situations, maybe for better or for worse, that you can maybe look into if you're interested. There were self-driving cars, I believe this is in San Francisco, and placing a cone on the car shuts it down. And there was, I think, a specific situation where a few cars got caught up in an intersection and shut the city down because traffic couldn't move. There was a lawyer who did his research on ChatGPT, and got fed information that ultimately was incorrect, and then argued that ChatGPT was tricking him into misinformation. There's been lots of interesting things. This is like a deeper thing that you can go and look at of like interesting things that being AI has done, and this is not a shot at anyone. Like all of these have limitations and question marks and ethics behind them, questionably. And there was one specific for me. This was actually using GitHub Copilot where I was doing an article. I was using GitHub Copilot to generate some of it because I was doing it in VS Code. And I was writing an article comparing rendering strategies in Next.js and Astro. And in Next.js, there's a get static paths to generate routes for blog post routes, basically individual blog post routes to like generate those at build time. And I went on to return after that one, and it was like, all right, now you're ready to write the part where you talk about get server-side paths. Well, GitHub Copilot, that doesn't exist. So if I just take that, it's going to be misinformation that I put out there. So if AI was 100% correct, all of our fears and questions would be 100% justified. If AI was 100% correct, it would take over, and all these movies that we've seen, all these scenarios that run through our head would 100% happen. Good thing is it's not. It's not 100% perfect. There's a lot of things I like about it. There's a lot of ways that it influences how I write code and how I work on a daily basis, but it's not perfect. And a friend of mine wrote a tweet recently that I thought was relevant here, talking about receiving messages generated by AI. And it's not like these messages come with a flag that says, hey, I was AI generated. They want to hide the fact that it was AI generated. But for Catalan, there's something about a certain tone, a certain word usage. There's something about certain DMs that are flagged in his mind, and he can tell this is not genuine. And that's because it lacks the human touch. And so I kind of opened today talking about all the things that AI can do, but what AI can't do is it can't be me. It can't be on this stage yet. It can't give you this presentation. It can't have the conversation with you in the hallway, on the stage, in the talk. It can't have those conversations with me. It can't have the relationship with individual people that I can. And maybe to kind of bring us full circle as we wrap up, not only the day, but kind of the end of what is an amazing event, it specifically can't connect the dots the way Tejas did. It specifically can't help you not feel alone and resonate with you the way Taylor was able to share his story. It specifically isn't able to give you this perspective that Lucia brought in her talk. It can't do those things. And so when we look at what seems like the last handful of minutes to get the most out of this conference, as you think about when I opened in the morning talking about getting the most out of this, and Clark referencing not taking your foot off the pedal, you're looking at, we've got 30 minutes left to get the most out of this opportunity that we have to be together in person. But I also want to challenge you to think beyond the last few minutes that we have and think about the relationships that you've built or maybe still have to build with people that you've a little bit connected with but have an opportunity to follow up with. Or maybe you'll see them in Austin in January, or maybe you'll see them next year right back here in Wisconsin. But think about not what we just have left today in person. Think about what we have and the ability to leverage that in the future, because the power of people is real. Thank you.